At 6 p.m. on Wednesday here in Korea. Thanks for tuning in. I'm Hwang Jie. And these are the top stories we're following at this hour. North Korea has reportedly intensified its firing drills near the border. The South Korean military says it will take stern countermeasures in the event of any provocations. South Korea's opposition party unveils more evidence that the nation's spy agency hacked into personal computers. The Chinese stock market plunges for the second straight day, taking a toll on the Korean stock market as the benchmark Kospi finishes below the 1,950 mark for the first time in 6 months. South Korea's military has detected unusual artillery movements on the border. Some military experts now warn Pyongyang may be plotting to blow up the South's loudspeakers broadcasting propaganda. Kim Hyun-bin reports.
Seoul's defense ministry said Wednesday that it spotted extra activity at the North's heavy artillery units on the border, near the location of South Korea's loudspeakers. Some experts say the communist regime is preparing to fire at the speakers. The ministry says it's keeping a close eye on the recent artillery movements to determine if the recent exercises are aimed at targeting the speakers. Psychological warfare is being conducted on both sides of the border, using loudspeakers to broadcast propaganda. Pyongyang's mine detonation on the southern side of the military demarcation line that severely injured 2 South Korean soldiers earlier this month resulted in the South resuming after 11 years its use of loudspeakers to broadcast propaganda over the border. North Korea has demanded that the South tear down its loudspeakers or risk indiscriminate attacks as a consequence. Both the U.S. State Department and the Pentagon on Tuesday local time slammed North Korea for the explosions, calling the incident a violation of the armistice agreement. The U.S. says it's keeping a close eye on any sort of unusual movements and warned North Korea that any further provocations will further it from the international community. Kim Hyun-bin, Arirang News.
Improper and overstretched. That's how South Korea labeled North Korea's recent claims to halt Seoul-Washington joint military drills for resuming separated family reunions. Hwang Sung-hee has the details.
South Korea slammed North Korea on Wednesday for linking the reunions for war-separated families and the ongoing military drills between Seoul and Washington.
The military exercises are defensive, annual and regular. The issue of family reunions is a humanitarian matter that must be resolved immediately. It is improper and overstretched to link the two issues.
In her Liberation Day speech, President Park Geun-hye said South Korea will send the North a list of about 60,000 families waiting to reunite with their relatives in North Korea. Millions of family members were separated from their loved ones during the Korean War in the 1950s.
이산가족 문제만큼은 아무리 정세가 어렵고 이념이 대립한다고 해도 인도적 견지에서 남북이 근본적인 해결 방안을 찾아야 합니다.
But in its state-run Nodongshinmun newspaper on Wednesday, North Korea criticized President Park for contradicting herself by mentioning the reunions when she laid the toll bar on inter-Korean cooperation. Just a day earlier, Pyongyang claimed the separated families will naturally meet once the joint military drills are suspended. The annual Ulji Freedom Guardian exercises between Seoul and Washington that began this week will run through August 28th. While South Korea previously planned to hold the reunions in time for the Korean Chuseok holiday next month, the Unification Ministry said there is no set timeline since resuming the event is of the utmost importance. Hwang Sang-hee, Arirang News.
A handful of experts in the United States are urging President Park Geun-hye to think twice about attending a military parade in China early next month to celebrate the 70th anniversary of Japan's surrender in World War II. Speaking in Washington on Tuesday, Evans Revere, a former Northeast Asia specialist with the U.S. State Department, said it would be inappropriate for a South Korean president to be at a military parade that's hosted by the last country to have invaded South Korea. He was referring to China fighting alongside North Korea during the Korean War. Other policy experts at the same seminar shared a similar view. They said it would be better for President Park to visit China after the parade. Seoul's presidential office is to make a decision on whether the president will attend the September 3rd ceremony later this week. Korea's main opposition party has disclosed the results of its probe into allegations surrounding the nation's spy agency that it hacked into personal computers of ordinary citizens. Our Kim Young-gil has more.
Lawmaker An Chol-soo of the main opposition New Politics Alliance for Democracy, who headed the so-called Citizens Information Protection Committee, announced the results of their probe of the National Intelligence Service on Wednesday.
All the domestic IPs which the National Intelligence Service tried to install hacking programs on between 2012 and 2013 targeted personal computers, including 3 KT IPs that we found this time.
The committee's head An urged the NIS to confess how many domestic personal computers the spy agency had tried to install hacking programs on over the past few years. He said the team uncovered the evidence after analyzing some 400 gigabytes of data released from the Italian surveillance malware vendor hacking team. The leak resulted in allegations that the NIS wiretapped South Korean citizens while the spy agency maintains it was used to counter North Korea's cyber terrorism. And the lawmaker and founder of South Korea's largest antivirus software firm, Anlab, also called for a separate investigation by the prosecution.
If the prosecution has the will to proceed with a probe, then it must raid the NIS now to secure the necessary documents and data files. I just cannot understand why the prosecution is not launching a separate investigation into the NIS scandal.
The ruling Saenuri Party has asked for the MPAD's support in bringing an end to the scandal by suggesting new measures be devised, such as reforming the spy agency at the Parliamentary Intelligence Committee level. Kim Young-gil, Arirang News.
Korea's ruling Saenuri Party has stressed the need to promptly carry through a labor sector reform to create more jobs for the nation's youth. Speaking at the party's regular morning meeting on Wednesday, ruling Conservative Party leader Kim Moo-sung said the failure to address youth unemployment will directly result in the decline of national power. While urging for the swift passage of several service-related bills pending at the Assembly, Kim criticized the main opposition New Politics Alliance for Democracy for its lack of support on the matter. Responding to the criticism, the MPAD's leader Moon Jae-in refuted accusations that the ruling party and the government are trying to use the Liberal Party as a scapegoat for the struggling economy. Moon added that the ruling party should not simplify the unemployment and labor market issues by acting as if a passage of a few bills could sufficiently address those problems. The Korean economy experienced sluggish growth in the second quarter, and while that was no big surprise, there's extra concern as Korea's growth was weaker than many other countries in the world, including those in the grip of a financial crisis. Kwon So-ah reports.
Slow growth is not an issue unique to Korea, as the world economy, be it developing or developed countries, are not in a particularly good phase. However, in comparison to other countries, the situation in Korea may be more serious. According to figures released by Bloomberg, Korea's gross domestic product expanded 0.3% in the second quarter of the year from the previous quarter. That's not only much lower than other major Asian countries like Indonesia and China, but even crisis-hit Greece is recovering, with Portugal also experiencing more growth than Korea. Among Portugal, Ireland, Italy, Greece, and Spain, or PIGS, the group of Eurozone countries that were affected economically by the 2008 financial crisis, only Italy showed weaker results.
The fact that Korea has posted weaker growth than South European countries going through financial crises means the problem is serious. Considering that piling stocks are accounting for 0.2 percentage points, the actual growth was at 0 to 0.1%.
Korea's GDP growth is now at the same level it was in the fourth quarter last year, and minus those 2 quarters, it's at its lowest in 6 years. For the time being, things are not expected to improve much, with experts saying Korea's economy will slow down alongside China. That's why financial institutions are downgrading Korea's forecast. In a report by Moody's analyzing the impact of China and Greece on the world economy, Korea's economic growth outlook was lowered for this year by 0.1 percentage point from a month ago to 2.5%. Kwon-soa, Arirang News.
Korea's producer prices have been declining every month for exactly 1 year. In July, the index that measures the prices was down 4% on year due to low global oil prices. Our Shin Se-min has this story.
Korea's producer prices have dropped to their lowest in almost 5 years, declining at the fastest pace since April of 1999. The Bank of Korea said Wednesday that its producer price index, a barometer to gauge future consumer inflation, came in at 101.43, down 4% from the previous year, extending its downward streak that began in August last year. The central bank attributed the ongoing slide to falling global oil prices. Utility prices moved down, with electricity, fuel, and gas costs dropping a combined 10.3%. Petroleum and coal prices posted the biggest decrease, coming in 31% lower compared to July of last year. The fall in producer prices, dragged down by continually low global oil prices, could mean that it will eventually help stabilize consumer prices and spur purchasing power down the line. But it's not all good news.
Producer prices, largely determined by the price of raw materials, could impact exporting companies as they lose in price competitiveness in the global market.
Experts add there is only one way to cope with the global oil glut, which is expected to drag on and keep prices low, improve the quality of products in stiff competition with other countries. Shin Se-min, Arirang News.
Korean stock prices fell over fears of a possible U.S. rate hike this fall and the devalued Chinese yuan. And our Connie Kim has this story.
Korea's benchmark Kospi dropped 0.86% on Wednesday to close at 1,939.38. It's the first time in 6 months the index fell below the 1,950 mark. The secondary stock trading board KOSDAQ dropped more than 4%, closing at 670.55. The sharp decline comes as investment sentiment was dampened due to uncertainties over a possible rate hike in the U.S. and the slowing Chinese economy that prompted the government to devalue its currency. Chinese shares also plunged for the second straight day. The benchmark Shanghai Composite Index slipped more than 5% in Wednesday's morning session, continuing its drop of more than 6% the previous day. The Shenzhen Composite Index that tracks stocks on China's second exchange was also down more than 5% to 2,061.92. Experts forecast volatility will rattle the stock market for the time being, especially with the recent devaluation of the Chinese yuan and a possible interest rate hike from the U.S. Federal Reserve this fall. Connie Kim, Arirang News.
Lotte Group is preparing to release initial public offerings for most of its affiliates and its hotel operator Lotte Hotel as part of efforts to make the governing of the company more transparent. Kim Ji-yeon reports.
Korean retail giant Lotte Group is pushing for the listing of its affiliates to help simplify its corporate governance structure as part of a reform plan proposed by Chairman Hyun-bin. Initial public offering is expected to be released for affiliates with assets between $253 million and $422.4 million US. More than 90% of all Lotte's non-listed affiliates fall within that range. This includes the group's convenience store chain 7-Eleven and fast food chain Lotteria. The group's also expected to set a mandate to hire outside directors to root out arbitrary business management when releasing the IPOs. Lotte will send out proposals to around 10 local and overseas brokerages, and candidates will be confirmed by August 31st. The final list is expected to be revealed in early September. Lotte, the country's fifth largest conglomerate, is expected to form a task force comprised of independent parties to carry out the plans. The move comes amid the group's push for the listing of its hotel operator Lotte Hotel. Chairman Shin vowed to relieve the group's web of 416 cross-shareholdings by nearly 80% by the end of the year, after Lotte came under fire for two of the founder's sons fighting over who takes over the group. Kim Jeon, Arirang News.
Domestic securities companies posted their strongest earnings in 8 years in the second quarter. The Financial Supervisory Service says the combined net profit of securities firms in the country stood at 1.2 trillion won, or slightly over $1 billion in the April to June period this year, up 23% from the previous quarter. The figure is the highest since the second quarter of 2007. The financial watchdog attributed the robust performance to a sharp rise in brokerage commission income. The government has vowed to make more accurate growth forecasts when setting its annual budget to prevent tax revenue shortfalls. Korea has reported a tax revenue shortfall every year since 2012. Making matters worse, last year's deficit surged to a record $9.2 billion. According to data, there was an average 3 to 4 percentage point difference between the government's nominal GDP prediction and actual growth over the last 3 years. Finance Ministry officials say the 2016 growth forecast from June may be readjusted. And that brings us to the end of our newscast. More updates coming up at 10 p.m. Korea time. Stay tuned and goodbye for now.